For over a decade, one of the world's most famous men had a secret son living in his own home, and the only person who knew was the housekeeper who raised him. Then one afternoon, the little boy looked up from his toys, pointed at a face on the television, and whispered 5 words that would shatter a family empire. This is the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger, his housekeeper Mildred Biner, and a son named Joseph who lived a double life for 14 years. It's a scandal that seems ripped from a thriller, but it's just one thread in a much larger, invisible crisis. Because right now, millions of people are spitting into tubes, unlocking family trees, and discovering that their father is not who they thought he was. What happens when a single DNA test can rewrite your entire history, collapse a family empire, and summon ghosts from a billionaire's past into a courtroom? In the fall of 1996, Arnold Schwarzenegger was at the absolute peak of his power. He was one of the highest-paid actors on the planet, a global icon, and he had just married Maria Shriver, American royalty, in a ceremony dubbed the Union of the Century. But in that same sprawling Brentwood mansion, another story was unfolding in the background, in the quiet hours between shifts. The housekeeper's name was Mildred Patricia Biner. She was from Guatemala, a quiet, dedicated woman who had worked for the family for years. Her job was to be invisible, to move through the rooms of that famous home without leaving a trace. And for a long time, that's exactly what she did. But in early 1997, she discovered she was pregnant. The timelines here are crucial, and they create a chilling symmetry. Maria Shriver was also pregnant that year, expecting her and Arnold's 4th child, 2 women in the same house, carrying children by the same man. Mildred's son, Joseph, was born on October 2, 1997. Maria Shriver gave birth to her son, Christopher, just 5 days later, on October 7th. Think about the logistics of that secret, the double life contained within a single home, the hushed conversations, the calculated disappearances, the constant, gnawing fear of a single wrong glance. Mildred Biner did not quit her job. She stayed. She raised her son, Joseph, in the shadow of the family she worked for, while Schwarzenegger, by his own later admission, provided secret financial support. For years, the facade held. Joseph grew up calling Schwarzenegger Arnold, a friendly employer. He played with the Shriver children, the half-siblings he didn't know he had. The truth was a silent passenger in every room, but secrets, especially ones tied to biology, have a stubborn way of seeking the light. It started, as it so often does, with a mirror. Around the time Joseph turned 7, his features began to shift. The baby fat melted away, and something unmistakable emerged. The strong jaw, the set of the eyes, the smile. He was starting to look exactly like a miniature version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. People began to whisper. Staff in the home noticed. The visual evidence was becoming a problem that could no longer be explained away by coincidence. Schwarzenegger himself would later say this was the moment he knew. He saw his own reflection in the boy's face. But knowing and acknowledging are 2 very different things. The financial support continued, a silent admission, but the public lie remained intact. The equilibrium of the double life was maintained through sheer will and power. He was the Terminator. He could will this reality into submission. But outside that gated Brentwood estate, a technological revolution was brewing that would make such secrets virtually impossible to keep. This is the second, invisible character in our story, the direct-to-consumer DNA test. In the early 2000s, companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com began marketing DNA kits directly to the public. What was once a complex, expensive, court-ordered medical procedure became a $99 curiosity you could buy at a pharmacy. By 2010, millions of people were spitting into tubes and mailing their genetic code away, searching for ethnic percentages or distant cousins. They had no idea they were holding a match to a powder keg. The technology created a new, brutal form of truth. It bypassed stories, skipped over lies, and went straight to the chromosomes. A single saliva sample could connect you to a half-sibling you never knew existed, or reveal that the man you called dad shared 0% of your DNA. For families built on hidden affairs, secret children, or sperm donor mysteries, it was a ticking clock. And the clock was ticking inside the Schwarzenegger home. Joseph was now a teenager. The resemblance was no longer a subtle hint. It was a billboard. The internet gossip forums were filling with side-by-side comparison photos. The pressure of the secret was shifting from a private management problem to a public relations time bomb. Yet the world still saw only the perfect facade. Arnold, the action hero turned governor of California, Maria, the acclaimed journalist and beloved Kennedy heir, their picture-perfect family. The housekeeper and her son were part of the background scenery, a blur in the official portrait. But every system has a breaking point. For Arnold Schwarzenegger, that point arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, personal decision. After leaving the governor's office in 2011, he finally sat down with Maria Shriver and told her the truth. The secret he had kept for 14 years was now a bomb detonating in his marriage. Maria moved out of their family home that same day. The news, however, was still contained. It was a private tragedy. But in the age of the internet, private tragedies have a very short shelf life. The separation was news. The reason for it was a vacuum, and nature, especially media nature, abhors a vacuum. Rumors swirled for days. And then, on May 16, 2011, the Los Angeles Times published the story. The headline was a seismic shock to the public image. Schwarzenegger fathered child with household staff member. The article laid it out with cold, factual precision. The housekeeper, the child, the 14-year secret, the perfect family narrative shattered into a million pieces. This is where most scandals peak and then fade into tabloid history. But this story was different, because the Schwarzenegger revelation was not an ending. It was a starter pistol. It was a high-profile, undeniable case study that gave permission to a terrifying new question millions were suddenly asking. If it could happen in asterisk that family, behind asterisk those asterisk walls, what secrets are hiding in mine? The DNA kits started flying off the shelves faster than ever. People were no longer just curious about their ancestry. They were now armed with a forensic tool, and they were turning it inward on their own families. A quiet, global crisis of identity was beginning, one spit tube at a time. And in the world of the ultra-wealthy, a new, specific fear began to take root. It was no longer just about reputation. It was about legacy. It was about money. Because when a secret child emerges after a death, they don't just want a story, they want a share. In the days after the story broke, the world watched a family publicly disintegrate. But behind the headlines, a much quieter, more profound disintegration was taking place. Joseph Biener, now a teenager, was suddenly the most famous secret son on Earth. He had grown up in the shadow of a man he called his boss, only to learn, through global headlines, the full truth of his own existence. His mother, Mildred, had carried the secret for 14 years. Now she was vilified in some corners, pitied in others, but almost universally seen as a character in Arnold's scandal, not as a person with her own shattered reality. The financial support continued, yes, but the cost was absolute exposure. Their private arrangement was now a public autopsy. For Maria Shriver and her 4 children, the betrayal was nuclear. This wasn't a distant affair with a peer. This was with a member of their household staff, a woman who had been in their home every day. The violation of trust was spatial, intimate, and profound. The family unit, so carefully curated for public consumption, was gone. And Arnold, in his initial statement, he said, "I understand and deserve the feelings of anger and disappointment among my friends and family. There are no excuses, and I take full responsibility." It was a textbook crisis management response, but no statement could contain the fallout. His marriage was over, his reputation forever scarred. But this story was no longer just about one family. It had become a catalyst. The Schwarzenegger case was a permission slip. It showed that even the most fortified, powerful families were vulnerable to these kinds of secrets. And if it could happen to them, what about the rest of us? This is where we must turn to the data, because what happened next was not anecdotal. It was a statistical tsunami. A 2023 study published in the journal Psychiatry Research surveyed over 700 people who had discovered a misattributed paternity event through DNA testing. The findings were devastating. 67% of these discoveries came from direct-to-consumer tests, and the psychological impact was severe. significantly increased levels of depression, anxiety, and panic symptoms compared to the general population. For 61%, the primary emotion was shock. For 55%, it was grief. For 51%, it triggered a full-blown identity crisis. One participant in the study described it as, "It felt like the floor of my life just disappeared. The man I loved as my father was not my father. My entire history was a fiction." Another said, "I looked in the mirror and I didn't know whose face I was seeing anymore." This is the human cost that never makes the tabloid headlines. It's the quiet, private earthquake that rearranges a person's entire psychic landscape. Relationships with the mother who kept the secret often became strained or were destroyed entirely. The study identified that worsening relationship with the mother was a major risk factor for worse mental health outcomes. But here, where the story pivots from the emotional to the brutally material. Because while DNA tests were unraveling identities in living rooms, they were also unlocking vaults in courtrooms. Estate law, a field built on centuries of precedent and paper documentation, was suddenly facing a biological hack. Most wills and trusts were drafted long before consumer DNA testing existed. They use broad, traditional language, "to my children, to my issue, to my heirs." For generations, that meant the children you acknowledged, the family you knew. But now, a biological stranger could walk into a probate court with a DNA report and claim that word, child, applies to them too. Consider the case of a Boston woman, highlighted in a Wall Street Journal investigation. She connected with her late father's family through 23andMe. Her father had died years earlier in a medical incident, and his estate had won a multi-million-dollar malpractice recovery. She sued for a share. The existing heirs, the family that had known him, argued against her. The case eventually settled, but the precedent was set. The door was now open. This legal open door became the new nightmare for wealthy families. It wasn't just about scandal. It was about succession. It was about the dilution of fortunes carefully built over generations. Estate planners began reporting a surge in clients asking for DNA clauses or taking extreme measures to lock down their legacy. But you can't litigate against biology, and in some cases, the stakes were almost unimaginably high. Take the case of Reg Grundy, the Australian television mogul who built a media empire worth an estimated $900 million. He died in 2016. In 2019, a man came forward claiming to be Grundy's secret son, conceived during a brief relationship decades earlier. The claim hinged entirely on a paternity test. If the test proved a match, this man would be entitled to a significant portion of a nearly billion-dollar estate. The case dragged through the courts, a stark reminder that no fortune was too large to be challenged by a previously unknown genetic link. It was no longer a family drama. It was a corporate takeover launched by a strand of DNA. And this fear began to shape behavior in real time. Stories emerged of wealthy individuals preemptively administering DNA tests to their children, not for medical reasons, but for legal ones. They needed a paper trail to prove paternity before a stranger could claim it. The home, once a sanctuary, was now a potential crime scene of the heart, with every member a suspect in a future inheritance war. But the most explosive frontier for this new reality wasn't just in entertainment or business. It was in politics. Because where there is ultimate power, there are ultimate secrets, and the motivation to keep them is infinite. Which brings us to a doorman in Trump Tower, and a story so dangerous, someone paid a fortune to make it disappear. In 2018, as the Mueller investigation swirled, a former Trump Tower doorman named Dino Sajudin came forward with an incredible claim. He said that in the building, there were instructions from management: do not criticize the former housekeeper. Why? Because, he alleged, that housekeeper had a child with Donald Trump. Sajudin claimed he'd heard the story for years in the building's gossip mill. But his account took a sinister turn when he revealed that in late 2015, just as Trump's presidential campaign was gaining unstoppable momentum, he was approached. The National Enquirer's parent company, American Media Incorporated, paid him $30,000 for the exclusive rights to his story. He signed the contract, he took the money, and then nothing. The story was never published. In the media world, this is known as catch and kill. You acquire a damaging story solely to bury it, to protect the subject. The doorman's contract even had a confidentiality clause so severe it would penalize him $1 million if he broke it. His story was purchased and imprisoned. When asked about it later, Trump's lawyer Michael Cohen would only say, "All these stories are false. They're meant to be demeaning." The housekeeper in question denied it. No child ever came forward. But the mechanism was now visible. This wasn't just about a secret. It was about the infrastructure of secrecy. It showed how money and power could build a containment vessel around a potentially world-altering piece of information, especially when that information involved a secret child and a run for the White House. The question stopped being, "Is this true?" and became, "What if it were? And what if the only thing standing between that truth and the public was a checkbook?" The catch and kill revealed a terrifying truth for the powerful. You could manage the media, but you could not manage the molecules. Because while you could pay off a doorman, you could not pay off a DNA database. And in the years following the Schwarzenegger scandal, these databases were growing into a vast, interconnected web that no single checkbook could silence. Anyone who submitted their DNA to one of these services was automatically compared against everyone else in that company's database. But the real game changer was a technique called genetic genealogy, where users could opt in to share their data with other asterisk databases. This created a de facto global registry. A secret child in California could be matched to a second cousin in Ireland who had also taken a test, allowing a determined stranger to reverse engineer their biological family tree. This was no longer a personal secret. It was a mathematical inevitability. And this technology began toppling secrets that had been buried for 50, 60, 70 years. Ordinary people were discovering that their father was a famous scientist, a respected judge, or a notorious criminal. The stories that emerged were not just tabloid fodder. They were profound human tragedies and identity quests played out in online forums and support groups. One man discovered in his 60s that his biological father was a wealthy industrialist who had died decades prior, leaving an empire to his official children. The man had grown up in a working-class family, struggling financially, while his genetic half-siblings lived in immense wealth. He had no legal recourse, but the psychological toll was immense. The what could have been became a ghost that haunted his every day. For the wealthy and powerful watching from the sidelines, this was their worst nightmare realized. It wasn't just about a child they knew of and were quietly supporting. It was about the child they never knew existed who could surface at any moment, armed with irrefutable proof, to make a claim or simply tell a story that would shatter a legacy. This fear began to warp behavior in subtle, dark ways. Estate lawyers reported a new kind of client, the preemptive disinheritor, individuals seeking to draft ironclad wills that specifically excluded any person claiming paternity or maternity through genetic testing not acknowledged by me in my lifetime. They were trying to legislate against biology from beyond the grave. But the courts were already wrestling with this new reality, and the outcomes were creating legal shockwaves. In several jurisdictions, judges began ruling that a posthumous DNA test could be used to establish paternity for inheritance purposes, even if the alleged father had never acknowledged the child. The rationale was brutal in its simplicity. Genetic truth now superseded social fiction. The sheer volume of these discoveries created a new social phenomenon, the non-paternity event, or NPE, support community. Thousands of people gathered online, sharing stories of shock, grief, and identity crisis. Researchers studying these communities found a common, painful thread. The betrayal was often felt most sharply toward the mother who had kept the secret. The foundational trust of knowing who you are had been broken. And the secrets weren't always about affairs. They included older, darker practices, the use of donor sperm without disclosure, children born from assault, or adoptions kept hidden. The DNA test was an amoral truth-teller. It reported the genetic data without context, care, or compassion. This context makes the final, shocking layer of our story hit with even greater force. Because the ultimate containment strategy for a powerful man facing a paternity secret isn't just paying off a story. It's ensuring the child itself never has a voice, a claim, or a path to the truth. In 2021, a lawsuit filed in New York Supreme Court pulled back the curtain on an alleged conspiracy of almost unimaginable scale. The plaintiff was a woman named Alexandra Latimer. She alleged that her biological father was the late, infamous financier and convicted sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein. Her story was not about a consensual affair. She claimed her mother was a victim of Epstein's and that she was the product of rape. She was put up for adoption at birth and had spent her life searching for her origins. Through DNA testing and genealogical research, she allegedly pieced together the connection to Epstein. But here is where the story plunges into darkness. Latimer's lawsuit didn't just name Epstein's estate. It named Ghislaine Maxwell. It named several of Epstein's powerful associates and companies. The allegation was that these defendants engaged in a racketeering conspiracy to conceal the paternity of children Epstein fathered through his abuse, using intimidation, payoffs, and manipulation to ensure these children never surfaced to make claims on his estate or tell their stories. The suit claimed this was a systematic, ongoing enterprise to protect the wealth and reputation of Epstein's circle by erasing biological evidence of their crimes. It alleged that other children like her existed, their identities suppressed, their lives shaped by a secret they were never meant to uncover. The case was ultimately dismissed on procedural grounds, with the judge stating the claims fell outside the statute of limitations, but the allegations themselves laid bare the ultimate, horrific frontier of the secret child phenomenon. It suggested that in the most monstrous circumstances, the secret isn't just a family shame to be managed, it's evidence of a crime to be buried, with the child treated as disposable forensic evidence. This is the logical, chilling end of the road, when human beings are reduced to genetic liabilities in a ledger of power and predation. The DNA test, in such a scenario, isn't a tool of self-discovery. It's a potential tool of justice or a target for elimination. From a Hollywood housekeeper's quiet pain to the alleged vaults of an international sex trafficking ring, the thread is the same: the explosive collision of biological truth with constructed reality. The power of a secret is proportional to the power of the person keeping it, and we have now given everyone the key to break the lock. We are living in the first generation that can no longer rely on stories. We can only rely on sequences of amino acids. This has liberated thousands from lies. It has destroyed countless families. It has terrified the wealthy and empowered the unknown. It has turned ancestry into a battlefield and the family tree into a legal document. But what happens after the explosion? After the DNA report arrives, the headlines fade, the lawyers are paid, and the shattered people are left standing in the rubble of their old lives. Where do they go from there? In the quiet after the storm, the people at the center of our story began the long, uneven work of building something new from the rubble. For Joseph Biener, the secret son, the path forward was not about a legal claim or a public fight. It was about a much more basic human need: a father. After the scandal broke, Arnold Schwarzenegger made a choice. He could have retreated, limited contact, managed the relationship through lawyers and bank transfers. Instead, he leaned in. He publicly acknowledged Joseph. He began spending time with him. He took him to the gym, taught him about bodybuilding, and included him in family gatherings with his other children: Catherine, Christina, Patrick, and Christopher. It was a messy, public, and undeniably brave attempt at redemption. For Joseph, it was a lifeline. He had grown up knowing Arnold as a distant, powerful figure in his home. Now he was getting to know him as a parent. In interviews, Joseph has been gracious, saying he holds no resentment, that he understands the complexity of the situation. He has built a life of his own, pursuing bodybuilding and acting, inevitably in his father's shadow, but with his own identity. But this new relationship came at a cost, and the cost was paid by the original family. Maria Shriver and Arnold finalized their divorce in 2021, a full decade after the separation. The wound was deep and slow to heal. In her own journey, Maria has spoken about forgiveness and rebuilding her life, but the betrayal permanently altered her world. The once unbreakable public image is now a testament to the fact that no family, no matter how powerful, is immune to fracture. Mildred Beener, the housekeeper at the heart of it all, retired quietly. She received a financial settlement and has lived out of the spotlight. Her story is the least told, and perhaps the most emblematic of the power imbalance at the core of these scandals. She was an employee in the home, in a vulnerable position, and her life was forever changed by a relationship with her boss. She carried the secret for 14 years, a burden of unimaginable weight. So we are left with a new, patched-together family structure. It is not the picture-perfect one from the 90s. It is something more real, more fractured, and more honest. It is a testament to the fact that even after the most shattering revelations, life insists on continuing. People adapt. New bonds form in the cracks of the old ones. This pattern, the shattered family, the gradual, painful rebuilding, is being repeated in millions of ordinary homes without the cameras. The support groups for NPEs or non-paternity events have become places of solace and shared grief. People share stories of meeting their biological fathers for the first time in their 50s, of forming hesitant bonds with new half-siblings, of navigating the minefield of old family loyalties. The mental health research is clear. The initial discovery is a traumatic event, but the studies also point to a path through: the ability to openly discuss the discovery, to find acceptance, and to integrate the new identity are protective factors. Healing is possible, but it requires facing the genetic truth head-on without the old stories to hide behind. On the legal front, the landscape is evolving in real time. Some states are now passing laws that specifically address the rights of posthumously discovered children. Estate planning has been revolutionized. DNA clauses are becoming standard in trusts for the wealthy, but even middle-class families are having uncomfortable conversations. The question, what if, is now part of the will drafting process. The technology itself is also evolving. The same genetic genealogy databases that uncover secrets are being used for extraordinary good, identifying unknown soldiers, solving cold case murders, reuniting adoptees with birth families. The tool is neutral. It is our secrets that give it power. And this brings us to our final, surprising pivot, because in the wake of this crisis of paternal truth, a counter-movement has emerged. It is a movement not of secrecy, but of radical, preemptive transparency. It is led by the children of sperm donors. For decades, sperm donation was shrouded in anonymity. Donor-conceived children were often told a story or nothing at all. But with DNA testing, that anonymity is obsolete. These children are now finding each other, forming large networks of dozens, sometimes hundreds of genetic half-siblings scattered across the country. And they are demanding a new ethical standard: the right to know their biological origins from the start. This movement is forcing a profound rethink of what family means in the 21st century. It is arguing that biological truth is a human right, not a secret to be managed. It is creating a new kind of extended family, bound by DNA and choice rather than traditional structure. So what are we left with? The era of the guaranteed secret is over. The housekeeper's son will find out. The billionaire's hidden heir will get a notification on their phone. The DNA database is the ultimate whistleblower, and it never forgets. This is the new world, a world where paternity is not a story told by parents, but a code written in every cell of our bodies, waiting to be read. It is a world that liberates and destroys in equal measure. It gives the powerless a claim and the powerful a vulnerability. It has ended one kind of privacy and created a new kind of truth. The story that began with a whisper in a mansion, "That's my daddy," is now a global chorus of millions, typing their results into search bars, staring at unfamiliar family trees, and asking the most fundamental question of all: who am I really? And as we turn from these individual stories to their collective meaning, we must ask what this great unraveling tells us about power, family, and the stories we choose to live by. So what does this great unraveling tell us? It tells us that the most powerful force on earth is not money or fame or even love. It is a story, the story a family tells about itself. For generations, those stories were unchallengeable. They were the bedrock of identity, of legacy, of law. Now, with a vial of saliva and a $99 test, anyone can check the footnotes. And we are finding that the official narrative and the biological record are often two different books. This is not just a scandal, it is a cultural revolution. We are being forced to redefine what makes a father. Is it the man who provides the DNA or the man who shows up? Is family a genetic bond or a choice made every day? There are no easy answers, only millions of people now living in the difficult, beautiful space between those questions. The housekeeper's son who whispered, "That's my daddy," did more than expose a secret. He exposed a fault line that runs through every family, every will, every photograph on every mantle. The question is no longer, do we have secrets? The question is, how will we live when they are found out? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the secrets in your own family tree, or the stories we all cling to, then this channel is for you. We don't shout here. We don't chase trends. We sit with the human stories that change the way we see power, truth, and each other. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment below. What did this story make you think about? Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Your stories are what make this community real. And if you believe in diving deep into the narratives that shape our world, hit subscribe, because there are so many more stories worth staying for. Thank you for listening.